Hello legends, welcome to the next video, this one on the non-price factors affecting the supply for goods and services. So in the supply and law of supply video, that essentially explained how we change markets when there is a change in price on the supply side of the economy. So obviously when there is an increase in price, that's going to result in an increase in quantity supplied because those retailers are going to be chasing higher profits, those suppliers. So this video is all about all the other things that can change in an economy and how that actually affects the position of the supply curve. And just like the demand one, you can probably guess all of these ones are actually going to cause that line to shift. Okay, so a movement along is when it's a change in price, but the whole line will shift when it's any other change. So those kind of rules are similar across demand and supply. However, the factors that shift the supply curve are different to the factors that shift the demand curve, because the factors that shift the supply curve are specifically things that are actually going to change the willingness or ability of suppliers to supply. Okay, and that's the key phrase we're going to look to here. All right, so if the willingness to supply changes or the ability to supply changes, then that's going to shift the supply curve. So let's get into it. All right, so we've got factors that shift the supply curve, as I mentioned before. These are going to cause the whole line to shift to the left or the right. And as you can see there in the left-hand chart, an increase in supply means suppliers are more willing or able to supply goods and services, and then so that entire curve is going to shift to the right. That is an increase in supply. Whereas if there is a decrease in supply or a decrease in the willingness or ability to supply, then that's going to be seen by a shift to the left. Okay, thankfully there's not 8 factors this time, there's only 5 that you need to remember. And these are the 5 things that are going to shift the supply curve. The first one is cost of production, and this is the main one, to be completely honest. The main thing that is actually going to change the ability or willingness to supply is the cost of production. If it's more expensive to make, then that is actually going to decrease the willingness of suppliers to supply because there's less money to be made if it's going to increase in cost. Let's actually talk about a bit of terminology here, the difference between cost and price. Okay, cost is what suppliers pay for their inputs. So wages, raw materials, rent, all that kind of stuff is a cost. Whereas the word price is the money that consumers pay to receive that good or service. Okay, so cost is what suppliers pay, price is what consumers pay. And so where we see this phrase cost of production, all that purely relates to how much it costs to actually make that thing. And when that gets more expensive, that decreases supply. Now on the other ones here, we've got technological change and productivity change. These two are pretty similar, and in your textbook, they kind of are in the same kind of area. Technological change will often improve productivity. Okay, so when we have an improvement in the technology available in that particular industry, that's going to enable that particular industry to do more with the resources that it's got. And that is what productivity is. Okay, so productivity is like the broader term. It doesn't always involve technology, but it can involve technology. So technological change are things like, faster internet or self-service checkouts or faster chips and processing speeds and all that kind of stuff. Whereas productivity is all about our ability to use our resources more efficiently. So for example, if the government, we talk about government intervention down the bottom, if the government introduces free TAFE, which is what they've done for certain industries, that's going to mean a lot more of the labour force is better at doing those jobs because there's going to be more trained people in those industries, therefore they're going to work faster, therefore improve productivity. Okay, that's going to increase the supply. And then we've got climatic conditions, and this is just like the weather and stuff. So when we can grow stuff, supply increases. When we can't grow stuff, supply falls. So things like droughts, floods, bad weather, storms bringing down power lines, all that kind of stuff is going to affect the ability to supply. Because if you're a farmer and you're growing wheat and you've got a really bad drought, you physically can't grow the wheat. And so that is going to reduce your ability to supply, therefore supply will fall. And then the final one here, government intervention, similar in a way to the demand version of this, where government intervention will then have an impact on any of those other four. Yeah, so if the government intervenes on, let's say, climate policy and puts more money into renewable technology, well, that's going to improve climatic conditions. Or government might intervene and provide a subsidy, which means money back, a subsidy to all the suppliers in the coal industry, for example, that will reduce the cost of production. Okay, so government intervention will always link into one of those other factors. So let's get into it. All right, let's start with cost of production. We're going to follow the same model as we did here with the other ones, except I'm not going to do the first one for you. You're going to pause the video in a little bit and say whether this is going to be an increase or decrease in supply. So cost of production is all about the changes to the factors of production or resources. It's the same thing. So supply will increase when costs decrease, and supply will decrease when costs increase. All right, so let's use petrol prices here as an example, and let's say which are a pretty significant cost of production for a lot of businesses. Yeah, it costs a lot of money to move things around this country, and also oil is a key factor in lots of manufacturing. So oil is the main component of plastic, for example. So the petrol price actually has a really strong connection to the cost of production for a lot of businesses. So let's say oil prices and petrol prices were to fall significantly. I want you to pause your video here and make a prediction and draw it in your exercise book on what's going to happen to the supply of any market, really. It won't matter here. So pause the video, draw your chart, draw a base supply line, S1, and then make a prediction. Is it going to increase supply or decrease? And the answer here, if the cost of production falls, which I think is what I've done in this video, yes I have, is no, I've done high petrol prices. Ah, damn it. Oh well, you get the idea. Okay, if petrol prices, I should have known that because that's a really high petrol price up there. If petrol prices go high, well, supply will decrease when costs increase. In your little prediction, you should have said supply increases. But the main thing here is it's an inverse relationship, yeah? So when costs go down, supply goes up, or when costs go up, supply goes down. All right, let's see if I can remember which way I did these for the next one. Okay, here we go, productivity. This is very similar to the example I used before. So what is productivity? Well, it's the ability of business to convert its resources into outputs. Yeah, how much they can squeeze from the resources that they bring into the production process. So supply will increase when productivity improves, when businesses can squeeze more out of the resources that they've got, and supply will decrease when productivity worsens. So the example I've used here is an increase in university graduates. Okay, so if there's lots more people who've graduated from university or TAFE entering the labour market. So you've got two scenarios. You've got scenario one before this happened, yeah, and these people are entering the labour force with a lower level of skill. And then you've got this scenario two, when there's a higher amount of university and TAFE graduates. Well, which scenario do you think is preferable to businesses? Well, I think it's going to be this one, isn't it? Because then those employees who come in with all of those skills can get to work straight away. They can start making things straight away. They don't need to be trained as much straight away. And so productivity should increase. So my question to you here, when there is an increase in university and TAFE graduates, what is the effect on supply? Pause the video, make your prediction, and we'll get to the answer in a tick. And if you said supply increases, you would be correct, okay? So here you've got more skilled people entering the labour force. They can do more stuff. It's the same amount of people, but we're squeezing more out of them because they've arrived into the labour force with a high level of skill. That means suppliers will be more willing to supply because they can make more stuff and therefore make more profit. Let's move on to technological change. Remember, this is closely linked to productivity. All right, so supply will increase when technology improves, supply will decrease when technology fails. We don't often go backwards in technology, so I want you to think of this as when technology fails. So if there was like a power outage, for example. But the example I'm going to use here is like faster internet. So if Australia were to get faster internet, what is the effect on supply? Pause the video and make your prediction. And if we have faster internet, that is going to cause an increase in supply because suppliers will be able to access things quicker and faster. They might be able to reach new customers that they couldn't have reached before. So technological change will improve technology, therefore increase supply. Climatic conditions, weather and stuff. I'm not going to ask you to define what climatic conditions are because it's weather and stuff. But what you do need to know is this changes the ability to supply. This is really the only one out of all 5 that directly change the ability to supply. I can now make it or I now can't make it. Whereas willingness to supply is, well, I just make more profit now. Okay, so that's where the willingness and ability come in. Willingness is about profit and ability is about, well, I can make more or now I can't. So for example, if as we are currently coming out of at the moment, a debilitating drought in Australia, you'll see here that actually reduces the level of supply in an economy. I like to think of just farming as an example. So if my level of supply was here, before the drought, and then I'm making corn, for example, well, I now physically can't grow as much corn, so my supply is going to shift to the left, right, resulting in a lower quantity supplied. We'll get to what this actually means on your 2 axes of price and quantity when we put our supply and our demand lines together, which is going to be in the next little unit. And then finally, we have government intervention. Okay, so this is the changes to law or provision of subsidies or imposition of taxes. Imposition just means a word put on. As I was saying earlier, government intervention on its own doesn't change supply, but this is something that will link through to one of the other 4 things that shift the supply curve. Okay, so supply will increase when the intervention is favourable for businesses, and it will decrease when it's unfavourable. So, for example, if the government were to increase the minimum wage, which is the lowest amount that an employee can be paid, if they were to increase that, what is the effect on supply? I want you to pause the video, go back over that question if you weren't sure of it, and make your prediction what's going to happen to the supply curve. And if wages go up, well, wages are a key cost of production. And as we know, when cost of production goes up, what happens to supply? Supply will fall. This might be tricky because you might think, oh, but increased wages is good. Yes, it is, but it's only good for consumers. Yeah, it's good for those who are working. And you've got to really be careful in your demand and supply questions that you make sure you are either being specific about this is a demand problem or a supply problem. And in the next video, I'm going to give you a little bit of a process to follow to make sure you don't fall into those little traps. So I hope that was useful, guys. Please feel free to go back over the video, watch it again, or contact me directly if you have any questions. Thanks, guys.